Olivia Warren's quiet walk home should have been unremarkable, but within minutes, she crossed paths with Daniel Harker, a man whose hidden collection of tapes would expose years of silent, calculated hunts in the dark streets of Grayson Hill, Olivia. Warren's life in Grayson Hill was as steady as the ticking of the clock above the bookstore's front counter. At 27, she was known by nearly everyone in the small town, not for anything remarkable, but for her kindness and quiet presence. She lived alone in a modest two-story house on a tree-lined street, her routine rarely changing. Every morning, she walked to the bookstore where she worked, arriving before the sun was fully up, and every evening she returned home just as the sky turned a soft shade of orange. Her world was predictable, safe, and seemingly untouched by danger. That was why the night she disappeared would send such deep tremors through the community. It was a Wednesday in late autumn when it happened. The air carried the sharp scent of fallen leaves, and the last golden rays of daylight faded quickly behind the low rooftops. Olivia closed the store around 7 o'clock, locking the glass door and adjusting her scarf to ward off the evening chill. The street outside was unusually quiet, only the faint hum of a distant car engine breaking the stillness. A few shops were still open, a bakery with its warm glow spilling onto the sidewalk, and a small diner where regulars sat in their usual booths. But otherwise the town seemed to have settled in for the night. She walked at her usual unhurried pace, her boots clicking softly against the pavement. Those who later saw the security footage from a nearby storefront would recall how ordinary she looked that night, her coat buttoned neatly, a tote bag slung over her shoulder, and her head slightly bowed as if she were lost in thought. Nothing about her posture or expression suggested unease. It was the kind of walk she had taken hundreds of times before, along the same familiar route, under the same dim streetlights. By the time she reached her neighborhood, the streets were nearly empty. Her house stood only a short distance from the corner, a place she could have reached in less than 2 minutes. Yet somehow, she never made it there. No one heard a cry for help. No one saw her turn onto her street. By the following morning, her home would be found in perfect order, front door locked, curtains drawn, the faint smell of her morning coffee still lingering in the air. Her wallet sat on the kitchen counter beside her keys, and her phone was charging in its usual spot, the battery nearly full. When Olivia failed to arrive at the bookstore the next morning, her absence was noticed almost immediately. She was reliable. To a fault, never late, never absent without warning. A coworker tried calling her, but the phone rang endlessly. By mid-morning, the concern had grown into a gnawing fear. Friends and neighbors gathered outside her home, knocking on the door and peering through the windows. When police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no overturned furniture. It was as if Olivia had stepped out for a moment and simply vanished. In the hours that followed, officers began retracing her steps from the night before. They visited the bookstore, spoke to the last customers who had seen her, and walked the short route she would have taken home. The path was straightforward, lined with a handful of businesses and street lamps that cast long shadows on the ground. But as the search widened, the lack of evidence became unsettling. No dropped belongings, no footprints in the soft earth near the sidewalks, and no obvious witnesses. The night had swallowed her without leaving a trace. By sundown, the story had already spread across town. People locked their doors earlier than usual, glancing nervously at every unfamiliar car or passerby. Olivia Warren, the quiet young woman, who had never caused trouble or drawn attention, had vanished somewhere between the bookstore and her front porch. No one knew it yet, but somewhere in that silent stretch of road, something had happened that would unravel the peace of Grayson Hill and leave a mystery that could only be answered by a piece of footage no one had yet discovered. If you want, I can now expand Chapter 2 in the same detailed and suspenseful way so it keeps the momentum going. The first 24 hours after Olivia's disappearance were consumed by urgency. Officers moved through Grayson Hill in small groups, checking alleyways, backyards, and the wooded edges of the park where autumn leaves lay in thick, rust-colored piles. Volunteers joined the search, many of them neighbors who had known Olivia for years. Her face, now printed in grainy black and white on hastily made flyers, appeared on every telephone pole, in shop windows, and taped to the notice board outside the post office. The same question seemed to hang in the air everywhere. How? Could someone disappear on such a short, familiar walk without a single person noticing? Police began by establishing a clear timeline. They confirmed that Olivia had locked up the bookstore at exactly 7:03 p.m. A camera above a nearby bakery caught her passing by just a few minutes later. From there, the trail grew faint. Another shop camera picked her up halfway down the street. But after that, she seemed to vanish into the folds of the night. The absence of activity on her phone puzzled investigators. There were no calls, no messages, no location pings after she left work. The search widened beyond her usual route home. Officers scanned the banks of the nearby river. It's dark, slow-moving. Water reflecting the glint of their flashlights. They swept through parking lots, abandoned sheds, and the old train station that hadn't been in use for years. Even the smallest leads were followed. A rumor of a scream near the park, a report of a stray coat lying in a ditch, but each one dissolved into nothing. Then came the first real clue. A neighbor on a street parallel to Olivia's mentioned seeing a dark SUV parked near her block around the time she would have been walking home. Its engine had been running, and its headlights were off. At first, the neighbor thought nothing of it, assuming it belonged to a visiting relative. But when the police canvassed the area again, several residents confirmed the same sighting. No one could describe the driver. No one had seen the vehicle leave. The SUV became the focus of the investigation. Patrol cars cruised the streets, hoping it might return. Officers checked traffic cameras on the main road leading out of town. But most of the cameras were too far from where Olivia vanished. In a town like Grayson Hill, with its limited surveillance, investigators faced the daunting task of piecing together a picture with only a few scattered fragments. Frustration grew as days passed. Rain washed away any faint traces that might have been left on sidewalks or driveways. The autumn wind scattered leaves into swirling drifts, covering the ground where search teams had walked. At night, Olivia's street seemed darker than before, the glow of porch lights unable to push back the sense of unease. People began locking their doors earlier, avoiding walks after sunset. Conversations in the grocery store or at the gas station always found their way back to the same subject. Where was she, and what had happened in those last, unrecorded minutes? A break came from an unexpected source. A local security company, hearing about the investigation, contacted the police to offer help. Several of their clients had cameras pointed toward the street, some of which reached areas not covered by city surveillance. Officers collected the footage and began the slow process of reviewing it, second by second. The images were often grainy, blurred by shadows or distorted by raindrops on the lens. Yet the possibility of catching even the smallest detail, a passing license plate, a shape in the distance, was enough to keep them searching late into the night. While the police worked, Olivia's family clung to hope. Her parents stayed in town, speaking to reporters in quiet, measured voices. They repeated the same words again and again. They believed someone knew something, and they needed that person to come forward. But as the second week began, the optimism that had buoyed the search began to fade. Each day without answers made the mystery heavier, the silence louder. Somewhere out there was the truth, buried in a few precious moments the right camera might have captured. All anyone could do was wait and hope that those moments would surface before it was too late. Shall I move on and give you Chapter 3 expanded to 600 words so the story keeps flowing? The hours spent reviewing the collected footage were painstaking. Investigators sat in a dimly lit room at the police station, the hum of old computer equipment filling the silence. Every second of video had to be examined. Most of it showed nothing unusual: quiet streets, the occasional passing car, a pedestrian here and there bundled against the cold. Still, the team pressed on, knowing that even a fleeting image could hold the key for days. The effort yielded little. Olivia appeared on one set of cameras near the bakery, walking at a steady pace with her hands tucked into her coat pockets. She crossed an intersection without hesitation and disappeared from view, heading toward her neighborhood. The next camera that should have caught her never did. It was as though she had stepped into a blind spot in the town's network of eyes. On the 5th day of review, a camera feed from an old corner store was loaded into the system. The footage quality was poor, grainy and slightly distorted, as though the lens had a permanent film over it. A flickering streetlight in the frame gave the video a pulsing glow. The timestamp matched the window of time when Olivia would have been walking home. At first, the scene seemed ordinary, with empty sidewalks and the occasional rustle of leaves blowing across the pavement. Then, the dark SUV came into view. It rolled into the frame slowly, stopping under the failing streetlight. The headlights remained off, and the faint vapor of exhaust hung in the cold air. Several seconds passed before Olivia appeared, walking along the opposite side of the street. The distance between her and the vehicle was enough that she seemed not to notice it. From the far edge of the frame, a figure stepped into view. The grainy image made details hard to make out, but the outline was unmistakable, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket, moving with purposeful steps. The figure crossed toward Olivia, and in that moment, she paused. It wasn't a startled reaction, more as though she was responding to something said or gestured. The two of them moved partially out of frame, their bodies cut off by the edge of the shot. A few seconds later, only the SUV remained visible. The brake lights glowed faintly before it began to roll forward, disappearing from view. Olivia was gone. The footage sent a wave of tension through the room. It was the first real glimpse of the moment she may have been taken, and it was hauntingly incomplete. Without a clear view of the person's face, or of what exactly happened between those first steps and the SUV's departure, it was still circumstantial. But it confirmed that she hadn't simply walked away on her own. Someone had intercepted her. Detectives began working outward from the location in the footage, mapping every possible route the SUV could have taken. They knocked on more doors, searching for anyone who might have seen the vehicle or the figure. Some remembered the flicker of headlights on a nearby road. Others thought they had seen a similar SUV earlier in the week, but nothing could yet be tied directly to that night. The discovery also deepened the unease in Grayson Hill. For many residents, the SUV had become a symbol of the unknown, a moving shadow that could be anywhere. Parents walked their children to school instead of letting them go alone. People kept their curtains drawn even during the day. It was no longer just Olivia's disappearance. It was the possibility that someone capable of making her vanish was still among them. Back at the station, the footage was replayed again and again. Investigators tried adjusting the contrast, zooming in, freezing single frames. Each time, the same unsettling truth emerged. The scene was too obscured to give them everything they needed, but just enough to confirm the presence of a predator. What they didn't know yet was that another camera, one not yet checked, had captured more than anyone could have imagined. That unseen recording was sitting quietly in a file, waiting to bring them closer to the truth than they were ready for. Do. You want me to continue with Chapter 4 expanded to 600 words in the same tense, suspenseful tone? The lead from the corner store footage gave the investigation a fragile direction, but it wasn't enough to make an arrest. The SUV was now their central target, yet without a license plate or a clear view of the driver, they were chasing a shadow. Detectives began pulling vehicle registration lists for similar models in the county, narrowing it down to a few dozen possible owners. They visited each address, asking careful questions, studying reactions, and scanning driveways for anything that matched the dark, boxy silhouettes seen on the tape. Most conversations ended quickly. Owners had airtight alibis, or their vehicles bore noticeable differences. But the list grew shorter, and with each visit, the tension climbed. It was during this door-to-door work that a name surfaced: Daniel Harker. He lived on the edge of town in a small house tucked behind an overgrown hedge, his driveway leading to a garage large enough for multiple vehicles. He worked as a mechanic, ran a small repair shop, and kept mostly to himself. According to his neighbors, Daniel was quiet, polite, and rarely seen outside except when driving to work. On paper, he seemed ordinary. But his SUV matched the shape and color in the footage almost perfectly. When police knocked on his door, Daniel answered without hesitation. His manner was calm, his voice steady, and he claimed he had been at home the entire evening Olivia disappeared. He said he had been fixing a broken appliance in his kitchen and went to bed early. It sounded rehearsed, yet nothing in his tone betrayed fear. Without concrete evidence, detectives could do little more than note his statement and move on. That changed within days when an unexpected source came forward, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Doyle. She lived 2 blocks from where Olivia was last seen, and though she rarely paid attention to local news, a friend had mentioned the SUV during a phone call. Margaret had recently installed a motion-activated camera in her backyard to capture the nocturnal visits of raccoons and stray cats. Curious, she checked the recordings from the night in question. What she found made her call the police immediately. The camera had captured a narrow side alley between her home and the back of a row of old buildings. The footage was blurry and dark, but the shapes were clear enough. Olivia walking beside a man, her posture stiff and unnatural. Her hands appeared to be in front of her, held together in a way that suggested they were bound. The man's build matched the shadowy figure from the corner store recording. The timestamp placed it minutes after Olivia vanished from the Main Street camera's view. When detectives compared this new footage to the corner store tape, the connection was undeniable. The SUV's position in the first video and the alley's location in the second placed them within 100 yards of each other. Daniel Harker's name moved to the top of the suspect list. With this, police secured a warrant to search his property. They approached cautiously in the early morning hours, arriving before sunrise. Daniel answered the door in work clothes, as though he had been expecting someone. Officers moved through the house methodically. The living room and kitchen were immaculate, surfaces wiped clean, nothing out of place. But when they reached the garage, the atmosphere shifted. The space smelled faintly of oil and damp earth. Tools hung neatly on the walls, but a large workbench in the corner was cluttered with objects that didn't belong in a mechanic's shop: spools of rope, duct tape, and a stack of outdated camcorders. A false panel in the garage floor caught the attention of one officer. It was slightly misaligned, the edges showing faint scuff marks as though it had been moved repeatedly. When the panel was pried open, the search took a darker turn. Inside the hidden compartment were personal items: a coat, a scarf, and a pair of shoes that matched the description of what Olivia had been wearing that night. The fabric of the coat was still dusted with dried leaves, the kind found in the park near her route home. And alongside these items, carefully wrapped in cloth, were several old videotapes, each labeled with a date. The evidence was enough to place Daniel under arrest, but no one yet knew the depth of what those tapes would reveal. That truth would only come when investigators pressed play, and the images flickering on the screen would tell a story far more disturbing than anyone expected. Do you want me to go ahead and expand Chapter 5 into 600 words so the story concludes with maximum impact? The videotapes were taken to the station and locked in an evidence room until a dedicated team could review them. Each was labeled with a date, some going back more than a decade. Investigators set up a viewing space, the blinds drawn to block out the afternoon sun, the air inside tense and heavy. The first tape opened with a shaky, handheld view of a quiet street at night. The camera seemed to be hidden inside a parked vehicle, recording passers-by without their knowledge. Minutes of nothing passed before a young woman appeared in frame, walking alone. The view followed her until she disappeared into darkness. The scene felt eerily similar to the night Olivia vanished. As the team worked through more tapes, a pattern emerged. Each recording showed a different woman, always alone, always at night, and always captured from a distance that suggested the cameraman didn't want to be seen. In some, the women reached a certain point in the street and vanished from view. In others, the camera abruptly shut off mid-recording. The earliest dates on the tapes were faded, but the pattern had been in place for years. When they reached the most recent date, matching the night Olivia disappeared, the room fell silent. The footage began in a dimly lit residential street. Olivia appeared, wearing her coat and scarf, walking just as she had in the earlier security footage. The view tracked her closely, zooming in until her face was clear enough to see her breath in the cold air. She turned her head briefly, perhaps hearing something, and slowed her pace. The figure seen in the corner store video entered frame, stepping toward her. There was no sound, but Olivia seemed to freeze in place. The man reached out, and she stepped backward, only to be caught by his other hand. She resisted, but the struggle was quick and controlled. Her arms were pulled forward, bound together with something dark, and she was guided toward the SUV waiting nearby. The driver's side door was already open, as though the abduction had been carefully timed. Within seconds, she was inside, and the SUV pulled away. The recording did not end there. The next scene showed the interior of a garage, the same one where the tapes had been found. Olivia sat in a chair, her hands still bound, her expression tight with fear. The camera lingered on her face for several seconds before tilting downward to show her feet tied at the ankles. The rest of the tape was unsteady and fragmented, as if pieces had been recorded and stopped repeatedly. The final frame showed the garage door closing, cutting off the view entirely. The footage was undeniable. Combined with the items recovered from Daniel Harker's property, it left no room for doubt. Within hours, the district attorney authorized charges for kidnapping, unlawful restraint, and murder. The search for Olivia's remains intensified, with investigators focusing on areas Daniel was known to frequent. 3 days later, a shallow grave was found in a wooded clearing just beyond the town's limits. The autumn leaves had partially covered it, but disturbed soil gave it away. Inside were the remains of Olivia Warren, still wearing the same clothes from the night she vanished. The discovery confirmed the community's worst fears and ended any lingering hope that she might still be alive. News of Daniel Harker's arrest and the tape spread quickly, shaking Grayson Hill to its core. People who had known him as a quiet neighbor or trusted mechanic struggled to reconcile that image with the predator captured on film. Investigators later revealed that at least 2 other women on the tapes were linked to unsolved missing persons cases from nearby towns. The recordings had preserved crimes that might otherwise have remained buried forever in court. The tapes were played in front of a jury, each one a silent but damning witness. The footage that had once been hidden in the dark corners of a garage now stood in the brightest light of the law. For the people of Grayson Hill, it was a grim reminder that the truth can hide in plain sight, until the right lens catches it, and the images tell a story that can no longer be denied.